Good evening. I call this meeting to order at 5 o'clock. This is a special meeting with just two agenda items, an action item requesting the approval of the 2024-25 annual financial report and an information item on the 2024-25 M&O and bond expenditure report that are required by statute. Special board meetings do not typically include a public comment section. However, Dr. Strom and I felt it was important that the community had the opportunity to share comments on the agenda items. If you would like to speak on either of the agenda items at public comment, please sign up now in the lobby if you have not already. If everyone would now please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Moore, will you please lead us? Whoops, sorry, microphone. We are now on the agenda designated for public comment on agenda items. Mrs. Chaffee, do we have anyone signed up to speak?
We do not have anyone signed up to speak tonight.
Okay, great. We will continue moving on through our agenda. We are now at action items. Do I have a motion to approve the 2024-25 annual financial report?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you. Mr. Moore, will you start off the presentation? Board members, please hold your questions until the end of the presentation.
Yeah, thank you, President Davis. Board members, tonight we'll be presenting the 2025 annual financial report. What is the annual financial report? This is a reporting package from the Arizona Auditor General. As you mentioned, this is required by statute that we complete these various financial reports and submit them to not only the Auditor General, but the Arizona Department of Education prior to October 15th. And so thank you board for having this special meeting and giving us the gift of time to make sure that we have these reports accurate and complete prior to that deadline. So as I mentioned, there's about 5 various reports in this package. They include the 25 annual financial report. That's your general summary report. There's a school level report, desegregation AFR, classroom site fund narrative, and then a CTED supplanting worksheet. And so those 5 reports will get submitted up at the conclusion of this meeting. Within those reports, I'd like to take the opportunity to kind of summarize every single, kind of some highlights of this. So the AFR includes over $871 million in total expenditures from all funds. And that equates to about 1.1 million in accounting transactions that our finance team, myself and Ken's team, has accounted for each one of those transactions. Typically, somebody is reviewing those, making sure they align with the rules and regulations. So I do like to take the opportunity to give kudos to that team that reviews those and making sure that we are in alignment with our rules and regulations that we are prescribed to follow. So with that, I'm going to jump into a few highlights. I do want to highlight the 2 funds I'll be talking about tonight, which is budget controlled versus cash controlled. The first set of funds include our budget controlled funds, and those are typically formula generated. I'll explain some of the differences that you may see on the AFR versus what I'll be presenting tonight. Those examples include maintenance and operations fund, capital outlay fund, federal and state grants typically follow that formula generated approach. On our cash controlled funds, I'll touch on a few cash controlled funds. Those operate by revenue brought in, minus expenditures, and then you have an ending balance. So pretty normal to us as in what we operate on a human basis outside of this accounting world. So first, I'm going to touch on M&O and our budget controlled funds. This is a busy graph here, and I'll explain starting from in the bar graph on the blue budget line. So the blue lines represent the budget from year to year. So I've gone all the way back from fiscal 21 and showcased our budget and how it's trended over the 5 fiscal years. You may wonder why over those 5 years, we have had student enrollment decline, and why has that budget shown increases kind of over that period of time. I do want to note that legislature every year typically has some different appropriations that affect the budget formula. And so inflation adjustments is one example why you may see that budget line either trending upwards or flat from a year-to-year basis. I will note out in fiscal 25, the year in which we are reviewing for expenditures for, you'll see that budget line. If I highlighted the portion that was one-time funded, and so we'll anticipate that coming off the budget going into next year, but it was included in that formula for fiscal 25. The next line I want to highlight is the yellow bar across the sheet. So that represents our budget balance carry forward. So that is budget minus expenditures, and then that gives us our remaining carry forward amount. That amount has fluctuated from year to year. I will note, so speaking to 25, I know previous presentations may have stated the carry forward was anticipated to be closer to $30 million. I will say, since I've come on board, I've had the opportunity to review some of our cash controlled funds and maximize some of the usage of those funds to bring that budget balance carry forward to where it's at today, which is at 47.5. On the actual forms, thank you, Ms. Benson. If you're looking at the actual financial forms that are going to be posted on our website and that are submitted to the Auditor General, you'll notice there's a $33 million ending budget line for M&O. What that represents on the actual forms is our cash amount. So as I mentioned earlier, we're talking in a budget-controlled formula fund. So the state gives us a budget capacity that we can spend up to. So we'll be carrying over the capacity of $47.5 million. On the back end that Mr. Alexander and I manage is the cash piece of that. And so we'll be carrying forward a $33 million cash balance. And we know that's at a deficit compared to the $47 million that we have allocated to spend. And that's a whole nother conversation that we'll go into maybe at a time when we talk about budget again and levying for additional dollars to true up that difference. But right now we know we're operating at a cash deficit, but that doesn't eliminate our ability to spend up to $47.5 million from the budget side. So I just wanted to notate that. On the far right, we'll look at, so on looking at 25, that 47 million represents 9% of our budget. So it's a 9% carry forward. In my experience, and especially in today's world, a good rule of thumb is to be anywhere from 10 to 12% with the uncertainties and today's economics, especially with federal funding. It is better to have a higher reserve to allow some capacity to absorb some losses from a year-to-year basis without losing operational consistency or any changes, drastic changes to the classroom. I did that 9%. I know 47.5 million seems like a lot of money, and so I did want to. An analogy I prepared was if we take our average teacher salary, which is $71,000, 9%. If the teacher saved 9% of their salary, that'd be $6,300, and so it seems relatively reasonable when we're talking about that comparison. And I know the 47 million often gets blown out of proportion, but that is a very reasonable amount. In addition, that 47 million is expected to absorb. We have anywhere from $20 to $22 million in compensated absence, so basically liabilities for if staff were to leave. Those are $22 million in paid leave dollars that we owe staff. So hopefully there's not a mass exodus, but again, that just shows the importance of a carry forward. And then I already mentioned some other important points with regards to federal funding and the uncertainties with that and having an adequate reserve. So the next bucket I'll talk about is the capital funding. There we go. Again, another busy graph here, but I'll go line by line. So starting with the blue bar, our capital budget has been it fluctuates from year to year over the last 5 years. So I'm going to start with fiscal year 21. And in fiscal year 21, you'll see the dark blue portion was our state allocated budget. And if you look at the 4.6 million that I have highlighted, that was actually still being reduced. In 21, the budget was still being reduced from recessionary cuts. So while we were appropriated the entire bar, we were reduced that 4.6 million from recessionary cuts in 21. In 22, the state completely restored the DAA cuts. And you see that's a solid graph, so that is the exact dollar amount we received. In 23, there were some additional capital funds appropriated. Those were ongoing funds from the legislation. In 24, we saw a large one-time legislative appropriation in capital funding. That was not ongoing, but it tells the story with regards to our capital budget. And then in 25, we saw, again, another one-time, a small appropriation. That add was about 1.4 million that we anticipate coming off of the budget for next year. On the yellow bar that represents our carry forward, it is typical to see higher carry forward amounts in capital expenditures because of the nature of the fund. So if you think of capital as a fund that supports, right, our HVAC large projects such as textbooks adoptions, right, those don't come about every year, but when they do come about, they're large dollar amounts. And so you'll see that fluctuation in the capital budget, and it's very normal. With regards to the red bar, again, these are the capital expenditures, same principle. It's normal to see high swings in capital expenditures from year to year, and that is just based on capital planning and when we anticipate expending those funds. Again, for example, if we did a large textbook adoption, that's 5 to 7 million. You'll anticipate seeing a higher expenditure in that fiscal year, but that expenditure will last you 5 to 7 years over time. And so one example is that if you look at fiscal year 22, the red bar, right, you can see a large capital expenditure year that year that had several high dollar items that we anticipated spending that year, but you can see those come off in the previous year. So in regards to future capital needs, I just want to highlight on this graph the fiscal 25. If you look at solely the blue state allocated budget of $31 million, and our capital expenditures in red on that fiscal 25 of $32 million, you can see that we're right now currently spending above our state budgeted amount, and we're using carry forward to absorb the difference. With no bond in place and no other capital funding source, it's going to be very important that we manage that carry forward amount for future needs and be wise in terms of how we use that with, again, no other capital funding available. All right, I'm going to jump to cash controlled funds. And just a reminder here, cash controlled funds, again, are generated by revenue, and then we minus expense, and that's how we get our ending fund balance. Some examples of district cash controlled funds include civic center rentals, instructional improvement fund, school plant, Medicaid, classroom site fund, community schools, which includes preschool and indirect costs. And then some examples of school cash controlled funds that are accounted for at the district level but completely managed at the school level, right, are your tax credit, your clubs, and your student activities. So those aren't highlighted in this presentation, but I just want to, those are managed by us, but managed by the school, but accounted for at the district level. And so looking at our cash controlled funds at the district level, from left to right, I provided a colorful chart here on the 5 fiscal years of ending fund balance. So this is the ending cash balance for these funds. So on the left, we'll look at Civic Center. This is, again, Civic Center is also rentals, better known as rentals. This is for rentals that are 12 months or less. Accounts for revenues that are 12 months or less. We have worked over this fiscal year to incentivize our schools to leverage or solicit and rent their sites a little more heavily. We've allocated or introduced a split of 70-30. So as we rent a facility, 30% of that rental will go back to the school for some discretionary use, trying to, again, incentivize our sites to leverage their schools to bring in some additional revenue for the district. The Instructional Improvement Fund, this one has a lot of story to it. So in 21, I got some background from Mr. Alexander here. The district was including this fund in the salary calculation formula. So what that means is the salary calculation would say have 70% M&O, 25% classroom site fund, and it had 5% instructional improvement fund. And at the time, it was supporting that, but that salary calculation got, I would say, out of whack a little bit, and that fund was reduced to a drastic level. And so the district took some steps to correct that and make some adjustments to that allocation of that fund. Going forward, we're evaluating the best use of that fund. So we have ending balance of $6.5 million. In my experience, some of the best practices are to identify a subgroup that are eligible to be funded from that instructional improvement fund, and then monitor that on a yearly basis on those salaries. The last one on the right includes our school plant fund. This is our long-term lease revenue. So this is obligations that we have in place for use of our facilities greater than 12 months. So some examples include cell tower revenue, some recent leases that we've got into with regards to Bezos and Polaris. And so these revenues, the best use for these is to leverage these for large administrative projects, which keeps our state capital budget allocation working largely for the classroom expenditures. So again, utilizing these long-term lease revenues for administrative expenses is a great use of this cash-controlled fund, while we keep the capital funds that we get from the state solely dedicated to the classroom is a way the district gets practice and is a great use of this fund. Some examples of expenditures in the past years was a $3.2 million HVAC project at the warehouse that was greatly needed. So a couple more cash funds. So on the far left, looking at the Medicaid revenue, this is reimbursement for expenses that the district made for eligible services paid from M&O and other eligible funds. We have a large kind of balance forward, and we're strategically looking at leveraging that for future district salaries. However, I want to caveat that there is some uncertainty of how much revenue we'll be getting going forward with the federal reductions in potentially Medicaid reimbursement. And so we're going to be cautious on how we utilize these funds, but use them strategically to offset district salaries, which they're currently doing, but look to continue to leverage that. The big one that's probably jumping out off this graph is the classroom site fund. These revenues, we're looking at an ending balance of $52 million in classroom site fund. I want to jump back a little bit, and you can see highlighted on this graph the difference from 21 to 25, and I can highlight that also by the exponential increase from the state per pupil allocation for this bucket. Just back in 21, we were receiving about $425 per student in classroom site fund. We're well over $800 per student in classroom site fund, and we have made, I know the district has made strides to increase salaries utilizing this bucket, but some of the hesitancy and over obligating this bucket include potentially going back to that, even that $400 per student amount, and being reduced revenue and not being able to support the ongoing salaries that are currently in place. So we currently obligate about 16.8% of the teacher's salary from this fund, and so we want to ensure that's sustainable for not only next year but the next 5 to 10 years. And some of the hesitancy, even from myself, is just the uncertainty with the economy and knowing that this fund is sales tax driven. This revenue is sales tax driven, so it is difficult to over obligate this fund from a perspective, but we are making some strides to utilize this funding strategically. For example, the $900 one-time stipend that the board approved going for this year, everybody who's eligible to be paid from classroom site fund that $900 is being funded from this bucket. So that's a great use of one-time funding and not obligating ongoing funding to this bucket that would potentially risk future years where teachers could be potentially affected. So we're looking, I know Mr. Wing and I are looking at this reorganization with the district side and seeing if there's eligible staff that can be coded or funded from this bucket going forward. So with regards to the last two, community education, this includes preschool and your community education programs are better known as Explorer, right, your before and after school. We see some declining fund balance here. We just know a lot of this is due to lower enrollment. We're seeing lower enrollment numbers in our Explorer program. The preschool program is also being evaluated. A lot of our preschool program is supplemented from our Title I funding, but we're still, the math is still, we're still running at a deficit with regards to that preschool program. And so that will continue to eat into that budget balance carry forward, which is that 9.9 million now, as we continue to evaluate like a future solution to keeping that program sustainable for an ongoing period of time. With regards to the last bucket, the indirect costs, indirect cost are funds, revenues that are charged back to grants to offset the overhead of operating that grant program. So you can see, I just want to highlight that yellow bar in fiscal year 23, that large increase. That was a direct result from the ESSER funding that expired. We were able to charge back a large amount from that last ESSER 3 bucket. And so that helped grow that fund to 12 million in 23. We are now utilizing some of those funds. They offset salaries such as my staff, financial services staff, HR staff who work, manage these grants. Those are perfect uses for those funds, and again, saving M&O dollars, leveraging these cash control funds. Lastly, I just again want to highlight these 3 bullet points as I emphasized in this presentation, but the M&O budget balance increase, again, was a direct result in us, preparing through best practices for future uncertainties, and then creating some adequate contingency as we move forward. The FY25 capital expenditures are starting to exceed the capital budget from the state. And we know, as with the next presentation, we'll have a greater reliance on these capital funds going forward. And that solution is only sustainable for so long, which is why I'm running a community presentation and evaluating how we fund these future capital needs. And then just our cash balances are in a healthy capacity for now. But again, I just want to caveat that federal uncertainty, as a lot of those cash funds have a reliance or some association with federal funds that we receive as a district. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moore and Mr. Alexander and your team. We appreciate all this information. I know as I've studied this, I hope it's bigger on your screen because my eyes have crossed themselves plenty of times looking at all these numbers. So we appreciate all the work that goes into this. Board, we'll go around, and if anyone has questions, we'll start with Mrs. Hutchinson.
I have a couple. First question that I have is when we go to the public for a bond or an override election, how can we demonstrate in this fiscal report, this financial report, the money that's generated by the public vote, say the 2018 bond, the 2019 budget override, the 2023 budget override, how are they reflected in the annual financial report?
Member Hutchinson, I think the struggle is this report is very, it is a cumulative sum of all, which includes a lot of those initiatives that have been voter approved. And so isolating those, I know the next presentation has a little more detail into those.
Right.
I think we could take back some points of maybe highlighting how we're utilizing those funds and looking a deeper dive into those specifics.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate that. The other thing that I wanted to ask is with the ESSER funding, and I'm glad that was all very prominent in the report. And I also saw our utility and energy funds. One of the things that when we voted as a board, particularly during ESSER 3, was we wanted to make sure that that the ESSER funds were not just one and done, that they would have a lasting impact. And one of the things that the board voted to spend ESSER funds on was HVAC. and we spent over $75 million on HVAC. I know I'm putting you on the spot, and I don't mean to do that, and perhaps sometime down the road, could you possibly give us a report on, did we indeed experience HVAC energy savings because we spent that money? I know that there were other reasons why we spent the money on HVAC, and a lot of it was for health reasons, so that kids who have respiratory issues wouldn't have them with the new systems. But sometime if you could possibly report on that, I would appreciate it. One thing I did want to ask a question on as well is, in the presentation, it says a 69,093 average teacher salary. And that's for 2024, is that correct? And the average teacher salary right now is 71,857.
Which
In
presentation?
the presentation, it says 71, but in the report, it says 69. Is that because it's 2025 and 2024?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, for my example that I provided, just to emphasize the 9%, that was
Yeah.
an average teacher salary from last year. So
Right.
I just took it from last year.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, great.
Again, this report is a summary of last fiscal
That's
year.
right, that's
so-
right, yeah, and I didn't want that to get confused because the board deliberately did a 4% increase to make sure that we were well above the average teacher pay in the state, and I wanted to make sure that that was not, that people understand that this is a report for '24, and that in '25 we have a higher teacher salary.
Yeah, this is a report for fiscal 25.
Right.
Yeah, and then,
Right.
Yeah.
Correct. Right.
Thank you. Mrs. Benson?
I concur with President Davis that these numbers are super small, and since I can't really look down, it was a huge struggle. I do have a couple of quick questions, though. So when I look at revenues on the actual report, hold on, let me get my, under other, it says government property lease excise tax, 1980, and it's, this is under revenues, I believe. Yeah. That, what is that exactly tied to? And it's got, when we have it under all other funds, it's about $75.5 million. Is that something that is ongoing? Is it a one and,
I'm going to take that question and bring back an answer to you. I can respond via email. I don't have that off the top of my head right now. So.
okay, thanks. And then a couple, when I look at some of the detail on page 2, as I mentioned earlier, I was more interested in looking at comparisons and totals from last year and this year. So on line 11, we have about a 49% increase in student, I think it's student or school-sponsored athletics, I think, is line 11. From 2024 to 2025, there was about a close to a 50% increase in funding for that. Do we know why that was? And is that going to continue?
Yeah, a member of Mesa, I can speak to that. So that, a lot of that is some accounting. So we are doing better at identifying those. So line 11 is on the actual AFR forms is, and that's page 3, is the school-sponsored athletics program code 620. So we are doing a better job in our accounting department of identifying and tracking those expenses to that program code. That is just some accounting practices that we continue to improve upon from an ongoing. That's not, we didn't 50% increase our spending in school-sponsored athletics. That is just us better accounting for those dollars by using that particular code that they want. the Auditor General wants us to use to track that expense. So
Okay, so is that the same case when I see the close to $3,000% increase, 2 lines down?
Yeah.
yeah, to 6,300 other instructional programs. Yeah.
And is that the same on line 18 as well when I see a 36% increase? Is it predominantly that it's a realignment of accounting using proper codes to make sure they're in the proper place?
Generally, from year to year, yeah, these are, every expenditure is reviewed by our team, and if we have new staff, we have a new set of eyes on accounting records. Oftentimes, we're evaluating that and making sure that it aligns. But when we get new staff, we may be seeing something a little differently, or somebody may be questioning something and saying, hey, it may be better suited here in this account code. And the account code book and the rule book sometimes is not as black and white as I would like it to be. There is some gray to that, and so it can be a little subjective. And a majority of our spending does get approved by our auditors. And so these accounting codes that fluctuate, I can speak to them. Like I know a lot of these are just accounting practices that have been changing.
So it's not necessarily that there's actually been an increase in the amount that we've spent necessarily. It's that we're putting it in a different spot on this form.
Correct.
On
And
this report.
I will follow up on each one of those lines though with you
Okay.
and a follow up as
And
well.
I don't know if this is the appropriate time or place to ask the question, but when we're talking about capital and capital funding, I know there was a court case that was just decided that will impact, I assume, money that we receive for capital from the state. Is that accurate? Is this an appropriate place to discuss how that might impact our AFR going forward?
Yeah.
I know this is for last year, but we have to be considering this current year and years going forward. So I assume that it's going to benefit us, that the results of that court case. So do we want to hold off on that conversation, or?
I can just make a couple points though. Remember that lawsuit has been in place or that's been ongoing for what, 5-7 years? I mean,
7 years.
yeah.
Yep.
And so the ruling is a big first step. I would say there was no funding appropriated with that ruling. There was no immediate resolution to that. So, and I know it's already been appealed. And so that ruling is just basically in favor of that Glendale v. I forgot who was V, but it was just a ruling in the favor that said the capital funding formula is deficient and is not adequate to fund schools at the current level that it is at. So I'm happy, I'm ecstatic that that ruling's in place. It's probably going to be another 3 to 5 years before we see any funding associated with that. And I don't want to hold my breath on that ruling and say, yeah, we're going to be fine next year. But I do. It is an important win for public education. But I think we're years down the road before we see any funding for that. And I don't think we can, at this point in time, plan for that lawsuit to support us in the future right now until we see some actual funding formula changes with a future ruling. So I hope that answers.
Okay, no, that totally answers it, because I hadn't realized it was 3 or 5 to 7 years in the making. But it is, assuming it goes through and we get an appropriate funding mechanism in place that will benefit our capital needs, correct?
It should, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Hopefully-
I don't have any other
ideally.
questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Benson. Excuse me, Mrs. Walden.
Thank you. I just had a question on the key takeaway, capital expenditures exceeding the capital budget. And you mentioned using carry forward. So like in the prior years, if we go back to the slide that shows the state capital budget in the yellow bar and then the red bar where we're exceeding that. And in the prior years, was that bond money that covered the excess capital budget? That was bonds, and then, but in the key takeaway, you're talking about the carry forward. Is that like a step down from the bonds, where you have the capital projects that are exceeding the budget?
So we're talking two,
Those are two, okay.
Yeah, we're talking two buckets of funding, right? And they both help one cause, which is our capital expenditures. But how they were leveraged can be when you have bond funding and capital fund, how those are leveraged and paired together to fund a capital plan for the district is completely different when you have those funds and then when you don't have those funds. And so my point on the slide as a takeaway is now we don't have those funds. And I know Mr. Alexander, the next presentation will kind of highlight that again. So now the only capital funding we really have outside of getting, school facilities grants and some of these other things that we'll continue to strive for and apply for is their capital budget and our carry forward. And we were living in a world with bond funds and our capital budget. And the presentation next, I'm gonna skip ahead, but we spent $19 million last year in bond funds. If we were to spend that plus the 32 million we spent last year, we're talking $50 million. We would have had $10 million in carry forward, and our capital budget would have been completely depleted. So my point on the going into this 26 year, our only other reserve for capital projects is our carry forward, and that can go in a blink of an eye at $29 million.
Yeah, and I appreciate you bringing up, because we know we have federal uncertainty and just with funding, and so there may be opportunities to have to dip into that carry forward to replace programs or funding that might be lost. But I guess my question is, with the capital budget, then there would have to be discussions about how to bring the capital budget in line with the actual dollars, where we're not trying to spend more than what's allocated.
Yeah, and I'm working on bringing the 27 budget. I know we're talking 25, and I'm working 27. And I'm working through conversations with with Tracy and our department leads, and I hope to bring forth a presentation to the board talking about some of the recommendations we have to the conversation is going to be defer some of our capital needs to align ourselves with our new budget reality. And so that's a future conversation that will be in front of the board pretty shortly. So,
All right, thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Walden. Mrs. Jaffe?
Mr. Moore, thank you for talking about how you have built up the M&O budget balance and this carry forward through efficiencies. Can you talk us through some of those things that you looked at to create some efficiencies and better accounting practices?
yeah, so a few examples include looking at one example I think Dr. Schramm has already highlighted in the board is our print shop, right? Our print shop was expending dollars, receiving revenue in a cash controlled fund, not in M&O, but the district was supporting all their expenditures from M&O. That was to the tune of about $1 million. And so that was an easy win, just moving their expenditures to the fund where their revenues were being collected. And so they are now a self-operating entity, and that's just one example. Another example includes with our CTE funds. So our CTE budget, 596, we had some capacity with regards to our supplement versus supplant worksheet, which is prescribed by the Auditor General. And so we have capacity of about $4.5 million in there to move additional funding. So we receive funding from EVIT via a Fund 596. That funding is intended to support our teachers and our supplies that our career and technical classes need. In my experience, that funding has been utilized almost all or entirety to support those needs on a yearly basis. And so there's about $4.5 million in capacity that we can move M&O dollars that we are funding teachers, CTED teachers from M&O into that 596 bucket, freeing up about $4.5 million in M&O capacity, which increasing our budget balance carry forward. So those are two examples. There's some other smaller ones, but those are two examples for you.
Thank you. Going into next year, what are some areas you think that we as a board should be aware of? And are we going to get a chance to get kind of that overview of cash grants that we've talked about at some point? Maybe not every single grant, but maybe getting a little bit deeper dive into some of those?
Yeah, some things to keep aware of is I guess the uncertainty, and I hope to bring some of the initiatives that Dr. Strom has tasked me with is bringing forth and sharing some of the choices that Mesa Public Schools makes with regards to budget, and maybe these are choices that are historical in nature, such as our choir program, right, or harp. I know it's string. But our harp program, right? That is the Mesa, kind of historical program that has been here forever. I'm not familiar with it, right? Just being new, but that is a choice we make to fund that program. And so just bringing some awareness to the variety of things that we fund on an ongoing basis, that we may or may not receive state dollars for, or they may not be receiving cash funds for. And so those are just choices we make that are just annual. And so I'm hoping to, as we go through this declining enrollment and evaluate some of our expenditures, bring forth some of those scenarios that we are funding and have those conversations with the board with regards to, do we want to continue to fund these, or, and just have those conversations as we, again, navigate this declining enrollment environment and looking at our expenditures and trying to live within our new kind of budget reality. So I don't know, Dr. Strom, you want to?
Yeah, Member Chaffee, just because Mr. Moore was not with us when we talked about the cash controlled funds and grant funds, we went through an extensive process last year where we analyzed every cash fund and every grant fund with the grant managers and the cash fund managers, and we have that process pretty dialed in PowerPoint presentation form. So if the board's interested in understanding how we're expending out of, let's say, Fund 291, that's Medicaid, or Fund 596, that's CTED, or 570, that's indirect costs, if they're interested in that, the hard part is if we dial in every one of those, there's like 90 funds, we'll be here forever. So what I advise is if you're interested in like 2 or 3 funds this year, and we go through those with you in an experience, whether that's during a board meeting or whether that's in status in a video kind of form, it should be pretty easy to put together. So if that's something you guys want to do as a board, we can certainly explore that and tell you kind of here's the Title I grant and here's how we spend our money out of the Title I grant. We spend it on these people, these initiatives, these things, because we have that process dialed in. The other thing I'll tell you as we prepare this year's budget, remember we're on current year funding, so we're living in this year's budget. ADM collection is something that is currently of interest to us. We're monitoring the data this fall on ADM collection, and we're cleaning the data at a fever pace to make sure that we're collecting all the ADM we legally can. We don't want to misreport, because what happens if you misreport is 2 years from now the AD comes back and gets their money. But we want to make sure that we dialed in all our numbers, and as those numbers get dialed in, we will set up time with every board member to discuss the ADM portion of where we're concerned right now with ADM collections. So.
One follow-up, Dr. Strom, at the January 28th meeting, you weren't the superintendent then, and we were all brand new. You talked a little bit about how having this report for 2025 would give us some insights into how block schedule at the 3 high schools we were running at affected our ADM. Will we have an opportunity to discuss that in those check-ins and get that information?
Most certainly, and that is the ADM thing that I'm issue that is primarily impacting our ADM collection at the 11th and 12th grade right now. So we'll check in with you guys in individual board meetings, and then likely if we decide to bring a December budget revision, that's still up in the air on whether we'll need one or not. But if we decide to bring a December budget revision, we'll have some information for the public on kind of the impacts of those items.
I just have one other question. Mr. Moore, can you help me understand the difference between the Instructional Improvement Fund and the Classroom Site Fund and how that plays with pay for performance?
Yes, I'll start with the instructional improvement fund. That fund, also known as Indian Gaming, is a revenue source from revenue from the Indian Gaming. So that fund has a kind of two restrictions. Both those funds have two different level of restrictions to them. The Indian Gaming or Instructional Improvement Fund has a 50-50 obligation, 50%, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Alexander, but needs to be used for a tutoring or dropout prevention. And then the other 50% is kind of discretionary in some sense. And so that's how that fund is set up. With the Classroom Site Fund, I don't know if I can, off the top of my head, list all the new statute rules regarding that fund, but in general, the fund is intended for classroom use, and now it has some new layers to it. It can be used for instructional support professionals, and it must have a performance pay plan associated with it. I can tell you how most districts are using this fund is having a small performance pay piece to it and having a bulk of it in the base pay of a teacher or those eligible staff on the support side in terms of instructional coaches, et cetera. Maybe Justin can speak to how we're using it as well, but that's the difference with those two funds. The Instructional Improvement Fund and the Classroom Site Fund both have supplanting clauses to them. So important to note, we can't just take an M&O expense and move it in there if we've already demonstrated that we can fund it from M&O. So that is why I mentioned, as we look through this redesign, anytime you have new positions or an opportunity for new jobs, those are considered an opportunity to evaluate the funding source. So it's a new opportunity to move those positions into a cash controlled fund and not have the risk of supplanting. So do you want to add?
On pay for performance, the Classroom Site Fund, it's only for certain roles or positions, as Mr. Moore stated. We do provide, we're unique in Mesa Public Schools, we do provide and have provided for a long time administrators and classified with pay for performance. That is not from the Classroom Site Fund. That is primarily from M&O.
Thank you. That was super helpful.
Thank you. I was going to also touch on the Classroom Site Fund, but I think you touched. I just know that as we go into bond and override discussion, that will, when people see this amount of money, that's a big question. Like, what are you doing with that? And I think the biggest thing is to understand that there is lots of restrictions on these funds. And I think the more we can educate each of, and myself included, can be educated on how these funds can be used, the better it will be as we move into this new age. Any other questions as we've gone around? Thank you, board, for your questions. And thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Moore and Mr. Alexander again. I think, Ms. Kirby, we're ready for a vote. With a vote of 5 yeas, we have approved the 2024-25 annual financial report. We will now go down to our information items. And I'm going to turn the time back over to you, Mr. Moore. You're on the hot seat tonight. So, and information item, Mr. Wing, you're on timekeeper. So it's all, are you good with that? Thank you. All right, Mr. Moore.
All right, thanks, President Davis, members of the board. I'm going to start this off, but I'm going to call for Mr. Alexander to help me through some of this presentation. Another report that we are obligated to make is our bond and override report. Again, I mentioned our AFR package. A lot of our reporting is tied to statute, and so again, why are we here presenting this information? This information again is tied to statute and outlines our obligation to report this in a public forum and have this annually presented. Those two statutes, I'm not going to read them, but basically highlight the bond obligation and the override obligation for us to present this information tonight. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Alexander to go through first the bond expenditures for fiscal 2025.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here, and I'll let you use the clicker, so if I forget anything, you can always slow it down and add some stuff to it. So bond, this shows what we spent our monies on in fiscal year 25. Those are the three categories that are authorized per the bond. So you can see we spent just over 19 million. I'm happy because you guys talked about half of this presentation already. So $19 million worth of bond monies last fiscal year, 11.8 in the construction renovation with 7 million in technology. We didn't do any transportation vehicles last year, but we did it in previous years. So overall, $19 million.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize again, this is a luxury to have this bond funding in addition to our capital funding prior year, right? And so that 19 million was on top of the 30 million that we had spent in total capital funding for fiscal 25.
So some of the highlights of what that $19 million got us last year: lobby and security improvements at 9 schools. We also did HVAC projects, intercom replacements, almost 7,000 laptops at the junior high, and quite a bit more classroom technology and AV upgrades. So this is sort of a messy summary, but I presented this every year to give an overview. As you can see on the far left, that shows the three categories, just like I had mentioned earlier. The next column shows the approved bond amount that was in our bond pamphlet, so 167 million on the repair, renovate, et cetera. The next column over, it says revised allocations. Per state statute, we can spend up to 10% of bond proceeds on other capital items that may come up, or for cost overruns on construction. So you can see right there, we spent $186 million rather than 167, and we pulled from a couple of the other sites there. The next three columns just show how much we spent during those fiscal year spans, so 19 through 24, and then the fiscal year 25 of the 19 million, and then the next column shows the total we spent from fiscal year 19 to 25. The key takeaway, I guess, from this one is the far right column. You can see remaining authority, how much money we have left in bond to spend, and it is zero. You guys have already been told that. I'm sure you've already heard this numerous times and talked about the implications of that. So again, no money left as of 6/30 of 25. So right now, all capital things are basically on our DAA capital fund. Just want to give some highlights again. Renovations make up the largest percentage. That corresponds with what was authorized in the bond. You know, renovations cover a lot of things: construction, remodeling, architecture, engineers, flooring, lighting, HVAC. I can go on forever with some of those things. Security hits sort of both renovations and technology, because we sort of use both of those, but we've sort of tracked those separately to see how much security items were in there. And here's where we identified the buses. We purchased 300 buses with bond funds over the years. That really helps maintain our fleet, so that was very important. So outside of the 52% we show for renovations and then security, you know, we have the other items there. So we spent these bond funds over the life cycle of the bonds at 102 different schools and buildings across the district. So it hit a variety of areas. Largest renovations were at Mesa and Mountain View high schools. I know the board's been presenting lots of information on those renovations and updates on those. The pie chart there just shows for the items that we allocated to schools or documented at schools, 59% were at the high schools, primarily due to the large renovations at the high schools, but 27% were at the elementary schools. We have a lot of elementary schools, and the 10% and 4% are for the junior high and then the choice and success schools. Mr. Moore.
Yeah, and again, we've talked about this. I just want to continue to emphasize what we're doing for future capital funding plans. So as we evaluate as this bond is expired, we're evaluating our future capital funding, looking at potentially future bond or capital override to support our ongoing needs. I've highlighted, I've already done one presentation, but we're looking forward to our next community budget meeting, where we look to bring forth some of these line item capital needs that we have ongoing, and kind of task our community to kind of look and prioritize some of these and get them more involved in that process, and kind of understand the why these funds are needed. And I think oftentimes people think it's easy to allocate or build a budget within these limitations, but I think some people get surprised when you start having to cut or reduce from areas. And so I hope at that December 3rd meeting, community can join me at 5 p.m. where we will continue to discuss and evaluate our future capital funding needs alongside our community. And I'll transition to the override.
So the other piece we're talking about is override. In fiscal year 25, our override dollars equaled $63 million. We passed that in November of 23 at the 15%. And those bullets there show what we were going to be using the money for, to retain and attract quality teachers, competitive salaries, school safety and security, preparing students for workforce and college, and critical staff throughout the district. So how is this making a difference? Just to put it in perspective, that $63 million is equivalent to about 731 teachers based upon average salary and benefits. So taking that into consideration, if we weren't able to fund those 731 teachers, all class sizes would go up by about 6 students, which would be a big impact to our operations and our schools. Overall, the override funds about 15% of all M&O salaries and benefits. And this has helped us to have better than average teacher pay than the state average, according to the Auditor General's office. We talked a little bit about that during Mr. Moore's earlier presentation. So retaining highly qualified staff, that was again one of the items for the override. This is the Auditor General's report showing the average teacher salary. Our numbers are there on the top of the bar graph there going across. So you can see we are higher than the state average, which is the black line that goes across there. One thing to note, we did have a drop according to this graph from 23 to 24. Again, it's average teacher salary. The main reason, I believe, is the Auditor General's methodology and how they're calculating this. They've changed it from year to year. There's a lot more accounting codes that they're looking at and requiring us to account for. In fiscal year 24, a lot of those codes weren't required. They are required now. So a lot of it was trying to do the best we could to categorize all the different teacher pay, which led to a slight decrease there. There's other factors that go into that too. One-time monies that are stipends that go in and then aren't there the next year could impact it. Experience level of teachers, if you have a lot of 30-year people and replace them with people that aren't making quite as much, then that could impact it as well. So there's a variety of factors that do that, and we do anticipate that that number may still continue to drop, mostly again to the accounting practice that they've changed at the Auditor General's office. Another item there, the last item I wanted to cover is security was listed as one of the items on our override sheet there. So you can see on the graph there our continued support of security and putting money into security. You can see we're just over a little over $3 million in 20, and we're up to about $6 million. Most of those monies are for salaries and benefits for MPS staff or contracted SROs. And we've also used some of those funds for security camera monitoring. Again, just to continue to show that we use M&O funds that are supported by the override funds on the security area. And with that, any questions, discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. Mr. Moore, appreciate it. Ms. Hutchinson, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank you, Mr. Alexander, for mentioning particularly the impact that the override and the bond monies have on our district and in our community. I'm not quite sure that folks understand that the state only pays for half-day kindergarten, and that the district picks up the other half for full-day kindergarten in Mesa Public Schools. In the financial report, I noticed that there was no monies provided for gifted education, yet we know that Mesa Public Schools is known for gifted education, and we have expenditures in that area. That the override, one of the reasons why our community supports is because they want lower class sizes. They want a more intimate experience, a more relational experience between teachers and students. And then security was huge, and so I really appreciate you mentioning the SROs, the cameras, but I wish that we had mentioned the schools and the front offices that are much more secure, because it's through the front office that someone can get into the school. And there's a huge difference between a Lehigh and a Whittier and a Roosevelt in the front, and how you can access the school. We have work to do in that respect, in that regard. So I really appreciate that. I would just like to make a suggestion that when we talk about how we spent capital monies, that we do talk specifically and name schools. People need to remember that their neighborhood school was impacted. The furniture, the library renovation at Whitman, for example. As I mentioned, the office at Whittier that they're very proud of because it's a welcoming environment and yet it's a safe environment. The performing arts facility at Mountain View. It's now become a community space that people are very proud of because it is a place where the community can gather, but it's also a very beautiful place and people feel welcome there. And I think the way that the community at Mesa High was elevated with the renovations and the care that campus received. It was huge in board meetings, monitoring that progress. But I think most importantly, we need to state the impact that it has on the learning environment and the way that it impacts kids. So if we could do that, I would greatly appreciate making the impact of not only the override dollars, but the bond dollars on our kids and in our community, but most importantly, learning. And so that I really don't have a question, that's just my comment. When we have, I know, another community meeting on December 3rd.
Thank you, Mrs. Hutchinson. Mrs. Benson?
Well, for a point of clarification, we do get funding for gifted from this. I'm not quite sure why it's probably listed differently on here, in order to provide gifted ed. My question would be, can you give us, and I don't know if Mr. Alexander, if this goes to you or to Mr. Moore, but we have on the future capital funding possibilities, the notion of either a bond, which historically Mesa has done, versus a capital override campaign. So we kind of know a bond. It ends up being, because we have a debt service, we end up having to pay for that. So could you, my understanding is that, my minimal understanding is that there's a slight difference in that. So could you share with us, like if we were to go present a capital override versus a bond proposal, how would that be more advantageous for the community? Would it be? What's the major difference? Is that clear?
Member, I can speak to the two differences. As right now, we don't have, the district doesn't have any recommendation on either one of these items, but we're evaluating both of them. But the general difference of a bond versus an override, the bond, to your point, right, is a debt mechanism. So it authorizes the district to sell bonds to investors, and then that is a transaction that incurs interest. There's a principal and interest payment that the district is obligated to make. So for the past bond, there was $300 million approved in 2018 for the district to spend, and I think I don't know what the interest was at the end of the day on that, but there was several $1 million in interest associated with that $300 million authorization. Bond mechanisms are typically used to fund like large projects, but they also support all capital needs, right? They're a mechanism to support capital funding in general. A capital override, this district, I've done some research, has never done a capital override, and so it operates much like a M&O override with a little different restrictions. So it's a 7-year authorization. It's 10% cap on the RCL on the capital funding formula. So that would equate to about $40 million a year in additional capital funding. And that is a straight tax on the property tax residents of Mesa. No interest on that is a straight tax. It would equate to about $1 per $100,000 of assessed valuation on current numbers right now, but those are two different mechanisms. On the bond, I want to note, you typically, Mesa has, my short research has done 10-year paybacks. Yeah, those can go up to 20 years. Most districts layer that debt over 20 years. I know Mesa has had a history of shortening that debt, which incurs less interest when you shorten the debt cycle, but you still incur some interest in paying back the.
Okay, so for clarification, an override, we're not paying any interest on it. It's used in, so the approximately $40 million per year over a 7-year period of time would be $280 million, of which we would not pay any interest on, versus the $300 million bond that we paid several million dollars in interest on over the duration of our payback, which we've not finished paying back yet, correct?
Yeah.
When I look at debt service?
Yeah, and if we want to talk taxes, typically the bond has a lower tax implication than a straight tax on an override. So there's that to consider as well. Until we bring forth any recommendations, I'm just kind of spitballing numbers.
Yeah, I just think it's good
Yeah.
for us to know, like, as we move forward to discuss these things, that I think if we're going to be potentially looking at an override, I think it's very beneficial to our community to know what are the two differences, which would be better for funding in order to get our capital needs met, right? So that's the only question that I had. But another, perhaps with Mountain View's spectacular auditorium and performing arts center, maybe they need to really be looking at renting that out to generate funds. So with that, I'll go on.
Thank you, Mrs. Benson. Mrs. Walden?
Yeah, so I don't have questions, but a couple of comments. I would like to see, I think we could do this in a future meeting where we could have some board training on the State Facilities Board, because I want to make sure that we are maximizing our use of the State Facilities Board. And then I'd like to see the data on what applications we are requesting and then what applications are being denied. I know there's some districts and board members have bragged to me that all their applications are approved. So I don't think that's happening for Mesa. So if we could get maybe a study session to have some training, and then also I'd be interested in knowing opinions on what kind of reform would be needed for the State Facilities Board. I imagine it's something that probably hasn't been addressed in a really long time. I personally, I'll take a personal point of privilege real fast, just feel frustrated that we have a lot of, there's billions of money in the state land trust that's earmarked for education, and it's just being sat on. I think there's probably so many better ways to fund things out there. We have no control over it. The school districts have no control over it. But I think the more educated the board can be on these issues, the more that we can work on behalf of the district and the community to try to make changes or lobby for changes that would help schools in a way that's, I think, more fiscally responsible than what's necessarily happening. And I don't mean that there's fiscal irresponsibility on the district, but I mean the state as a whole, where we're sitting on billions of dollars that can only be used for education. And why is that not being used for education? And that's where I think we've had to rely on communities to fund education when the system was set up to do that in the 1800s. So that's the kind of stuff I feel like I'd like to look at. I know that's not going to solve our problems today, but getting very educated on the State Facilities Board would be, I think, very helpful for us as board members. The other comment I wanted to make too is I know that Mr. Moore, you're looking at different options. So is this correct? There's 3 types of overrides. We currently have an M&O override, but there's a special override that you can do for things like full day kindergarten and then a capital override.
That's
So,
correct, yeah.
so I think, and when we're looking at what kind of funding the district wants to present to the board, we mentioned the capital override, but Mrs. Hutchinson brought up the full day kindergarten, and the state's only funded for half day. Have we looked at doing a special override for for kindergarten. I think those are considerations like what, if we look at all of the different override options, are there considerations that we should be looking at maybe to fund kindergarten or funding arts and music? The override it's all property taxes, the bond and override, but the override seems to be like the cheaper option though, because you're not paying all that interest. I just personally don't like bonds because it's my property taxes that's paying interest to somebody. So like a pension fund will buy school bonds and it's secure and they get a rate of return, but that rate of return isn't really a return. There's no profit. It's just my property taxes. So I'd rather just take property taxes and just pay it to the school than have to pay interest to somebody. But I know that the bonds are really based on the purpose. These overrides don't allow you to spend money the same way as bonds, and I do understand that. But I think if we're, looking at all of our options and we want to be as transparent as possible, I would really appreciate, and it would help me in my decision making and trying to be fiscally responsible, that we look at all the overrides too. Maybe there's, instead of funding kindergarten from one fund, maybe full day kindergarten should be an override, and that I think gives parents the chance to vote on that too. People don't know that the way funding works for education. They don't realize that the state doesn't give us full day kindergarten. And it's really popular. Like, I'm surprised. I wanted half day, and I was like in a very small minority of parents that wanted half day. We've really gotten to that point where our community, they want and expect full day kindergarten. I think that's most parents now, and I'm an outlier there. And, maybe that needs to be funded with a special override rather than how we're funding it now.
Member Walden, two things. First, I really appreciate the thought behind your comment on the Arizona State Land Trust. Representative Gress down at the state legislature has been working to figure out solutions on the Arizona State Land Trust and how to best use the money, one of which of his ideas he proposed last year was centered on teacher pay. And I just appreciate, there's been reports out there about all the money that school districts have in dead cash, which is cash we really can't use as a school district because we don't have the budget authority to use it. And so pointing out that there's other places in the state of Arizona that have funds available in the corpus of that fund to benefit public schools is something that I think we all need to be aware of, and hopefully Representative Gress continues to make progress on that at the state level. And so educating on behalf of SFOB and what's happening there is something that we certainly can bring back to the board, because I think that helps the board better understand how limited the grants are from the state right now at $200 million. I will tell you, as someone who has been on the operations side in another district, we used to get a little upset at Mesa for their high acquisition rate of schools facility board grants. So it'll be pretty easy to draw up the data and show you exactly what proportion of school facility board grants Mesa Public Schools is getting. The second thing I just want to mention really quickly, the combination, so we are exploring any, Mr. Moore has done a wonderful job of bringing us fresh set of eyes on things. And we are exploring any and everything we can do to try to make our facilities in Mesa Public Schools live into the fact that the learning for students improves when facilities are proper, when facilities are up to date. And a capital override is something we continue to explore. We'll have some stuff in front of you in the spring. That's what we're planning out here. But the M&O override, and especially override, can go no more than 15% in combo. So that's a rule in state legislature. So we're already at a 15% capacity on the M&O override. So especially override would not be an option for us because we're already at capacity. And that's why the capital override portion is what's intriguing to us. And then please remember that capital dollars and M&O dollars can go back and forth. We can line item them. Most financial people will tell you never want to take capital dollars and move it to M&O. But if you need to relieve capital by moving M&O to capital, that's a lot better off. So that's another thing that we continue to deliberate, like, should we start moving money from point A to point B? It's a tough conversation to have when you start to have limited capital dollars in the district.
So I see. So it's 15% total out of so there's three types of overrides, but the total cannot exceed 15%.
On the M&Os.
Out of the two of them.
Yeah.
The capital override can be an extra 10%, but between the two, specialty and M&O, that can add to no more than 15%.
Oh, okay, I see. Thank you. I appreciate that. So, on our M&O override, the 63 million, that's what's being collected a year from property taxes? It's 63 a year?
Yeah, that was for the last year, so this year, we'd have to look at the budget to see what that calculation is. It's based upon prior year average daily membership and funding factors.
Okay, and then just remind me, how long is that override in place until? Do we know?
It was voted in 23, so the first year was 24, 25, 25, 26, 26, 27, 27, 28, 28, 29, full funding. And then in 29, 30, it goes down by a third if the voters don't reauthorize it, and then it reduces by a third every year until it's zero.
Yeah, unlike the capital override, capital override would be 7 years fully funded. The M&O override has for some reason, a 5-year fully funded stipulate, and then it has a phase down. So you have to renew if you want to continue that in year 4 or 5. I love Arizona rules.
What are we currently funding kindergarten out of? Is there any special fund for that?
M&O.
Just
Just
M&O.
M&O.
It's
Just
just coming
M&O.
out of M&O.
Okay.
So, I mean, we could account for the override being something that brings in monies that helps us on the M&O side to pay for full day K.
But ultimately, if you want to look at a formula, like whatever excess we have, we're using to supplement the lack of funding that we're getting from kinder. So if we were fully funded, maybe that would allow us to lower our class sizes. But because of the situation that we're in, just an example, we have to put one more student in each class to help supplement the lack of funding we're getting from not getting funding for full-time kindergarten. So, but we pick it up in the budget.
All right. Well, that was all my comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Walden. Mrs. Jaffe?
Those are some great questions. Thank you, Member Walden, answering lots of my questions. I have just a couple more. How are we looking at redundancies in technology? I know that when we had ESSER funds, we invested a lot in one-to-one technology, and our kids have access to Canva and Google Classroom and all of these different softwares. What are we doing to evaluate where we have redundancies?
Yeah, that is a part of our ZBB or zero-based budgeting process. And so, as I've stated earlier, I'm working with departments, including someone to my right who has a lot of software. And I know she has, we've already talked about, going line by line and reviewing those on an annual basis and whether we're continuing to use those. I know her department has already done that in great lengths because I've seen just from year to year budget savings in my evaluation. And so we continue to do that on that ZBB, zero-based budgeting methodology that we are now utilizing on a year-to-year basis. So,
Thank you. And then I just had a comment. I have seen how the improvements on our campuses have really helped. I remember walking into the Mountain View choir room and a student saying, I feel so lucky. I feel like someone cares about me, that I get to learn in a space like this every day. And I just want to remind our community that we have schools that haven't been able to be touched. I talk often to Red Mountain parents who are like, yeah, that'd be great, but we didn't get it yet. And so I think as we have these conversations to engage the Red Mountain community and make sure that they feel heard and seen and know that we do want their students also to receive upgrades. I know it's been a great benefit to many of our campuses, but we have a lot who are still wanting updates, and for HVAC, updates is great, but anyone who has walked the campuses during back to school knows that we have a lot more updates to make in our HVAC systems. They take a lot of pressure in the Arizona summers, and so I think it's definitely important conversations to have with our community and help our students to feel seen and known and know that we want them to learn in beautiful and safe environments.
Thank you. Thank you, board members, for your questions. Really quick, I know we keep adding time, so thank you, Cameo and Mr. Wing. On the capital override, are there restrictions as far as limitations of what projects can be done with that? Like,
no, President Davis, it falls in line with the definition of utilizing capital funding, so it can be used for building renovations, FF&E, furniture and equipment, and technology. The problem comes about when you're only getting $40 million a year, right? That typically is not enough to rebuild a school unless you're going to allocate it all to one school, which with our technology needs, our curriculum needs, right? You start adding those in there. That funding solution is oftentimes a great solution to keep a one-to-one device initiative in place, to keep a curriculum replacement schedule in place, to refurbish playgrounds. But when it comes to rebuilding schools or talking that conversation, right, we're talking 50, $60 million. And so that funding mechanism is typically not adequate when it comes to those conversations. So I just want to point that out in my experience.
Perfect, thank you. Do you think, looking at our campuses and needs, do we have buildings that are, or campuses in need of being rebuilt?
I will say I've been here a little longer than Tyler, although don't have maybe Mr. Alexander's years of experience in Mesa Public Schools. I will say with certainty that there are certain schools in Mesa Public Schools that are probably approaching the end of useful life. There is an initiative at the SFOB, this will be in the education process, to come up with how does the state fund building scrape and replaces when they get to end of useful life, and how does the state fund that? Because right now the state only funds districts who are at capacity and want a new school. But in Mesa Public Schools, I can tell you there are facilities that we would consider applying for. If the SFOB has an end of useful life element to it, we would apply tomorrow for some of our schools to move into end of useful life and garner state funding to try to rebuild those schools.
Great, and I do think that a study session or some sort of education on the SFOB would be fantastic, so we'll put that in. Really quick, how many, do we know offhand how many of our schools have not had the front office remodels done? Do we know? Sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
A little over 30, but don't quote me on that. 'Cause
Okay, so we still have quite a few that have not been.
It's quite a few elementaries.
Okay, that was what I was just, so there is a big need for some big projects to go on. And I'm sure this rain over the last weekend did not help with any of the, accentuate those needs in some of these. So, well, we appreciate the information. Board members, we do have a spreadsheet. If you think of other questions or have other thoughts, if you can put those in on the spreadsheet, you can link that in board docs. And that brings us to the end of our meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Kirby, will you please take our vote? With a vote of 5 yeas, the meeting is adjourned at 6:23, and thank you all for being here tonight. Have a wonderful evening.